Hello and welcome to the analysis of the Hindu newspaper dated March 3rd, 2023. In this video, we are going to talk about two important newspaper articles. Actually, there are three important newspaper articles which are very important, very significant for the civil services examination. Let's now head to the first important newspaper article without any further delay. Now, this particular newspaper article talks about the Chief Election Commissioner and his office, that is the Election Commission. Now, this particular newspaper article becomes important for the GS paper 2, that is appointment to various constitutional posts, powers, functions and responsibilities of various constitutional bodies, because Election Commission is a constitutional body. Let's first understand the context of it. We will talk about the judgment as well, and then we will talk about Election Commission office in totality. A constitutional bench of the Supreme Court on Thursday directed in a landmark judgment that Chief Election Commissioner and election commissioners will be appointed by the President on the advice of panel of three people, that is the Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition and the Chief Justice of India. Now, these are major changes to the appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner, because earlier the Chief Election Commissioner used to be appointed by the President on the advice of Prime Minister only. But now, Chief Election Commissioner as well as the election commissioners will be appointed by this particular panel. Panel consisting of three people: the Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition in the Lok Sabha, and if there is no Leader of Opposition in the Lok Sabha, as the case is right now, so the leader of the single largest party in the opposition is going to take that position, and then there is going to be the Chief Justice of India, and the panel of these three people are going to make the appointment for the Chief Election Commissioner as well as the election commissioners, right? So now this particular judgment, according to the court, means that the election commission needs a fierce independence, neutrality and honesty, and that is why this particular judgment according to the Supreme Court has been passed, because this particular institution requires an end to the government monopoly and exclusive control over the appointments to the highest poll body, right? So these appointments have been now made less monopolistic by the government. Now, how will the judgment be implemented? Basically, the courts at the high powered committee would continue to advise the president on the appointment until the parliament enacts a law. And after that, what is going to happen? The law is going to be implemented and the Chief Election Commissioner and the election commissioners are going to be appointed by the panel of these three people. Now, the Chief Election Commissioners and the election commissioners have been so far appointed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister, and that particular thing is now not going to happen. Now, these appointments are going to be made by the panel of three people, that is the Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition as well as the Chief Justice of India, right? So there were major opinions that were presented by the Supreme Court justices, and that is why we are going to talk about them as well. Now, the Justice Ajay Rastogi added that the procedural safeguards in the place for affecting the removal of the CEC should be extended to the election commissioners under the first proviso to the Article 324(5) of the Constitution. And this basically agrees to what? Removal of the election commissioners. They should not, or this particular election commissioner's removal should not happen through the government. It should happen via the Chief Election Commissioner, right? This is the first thing. This is the first opinion which has been presented. The second opinion is regarding the funds and autonomy. So the funds which are being provided to the Chief Election Commissioner should be made through now the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, this particular thing is going to happen so that the court further made a fervent appeal to the parliament and the union government to set up a permanent secretariat which draws its expenses directly from the Consolidated Fund of India. And if the funding is provided by the Consolidated Fund of India, what is going to happen? The less dependence is going to happen on the government, and the less dependence means that the monopoly of the government is going to end regarding the Election Commission office. Right, so these are some of the major opinions which are presented by the justices in the bench, in this particular constitution bench, which decided this particular judgment. Now, the judgment is very significant because the judgment has now brought the appointments process of the Chief Election Commissioner and the Election Commissioner on a par with that of the CBI director, and it will make the Election Commissioner more commission more independent, neutral and honest. This is the particular significance of the judgment. We have talked about the judgment. Let's now talk about the election commission office. Now, election commission is a permanent and independent body established by the Constitution of India to ensure free and fair elections in the country. If it is a constitutional body, then it is going to find a mention in the articles of the Constitution, and that is why the Article 324 talks about the Constitution of the Election Commission. Now, Article 324 of the Constitution provides the power of superintendence, direction and control of the elections. Now, the elections are going to be conducted by the Election Commission. Regarding the offices in the Parliament, all the MPs are going to be what? Elected by the people, but this particular election is going to be controlled by the Election Commission. Now, the control of elections of the state legislatures also falls in the hands of the Election Commission. The office of the President of India, the office of Vice President of India, all of these things happen under the elections to these particular offices happen under the Election Commission's watch. Now, let's talk about the composition of the Election Commission. Now, the Election Commission consists of the Chief Election Commissioners and the other election commissioners. Now, from time to time, the President may decide the number of the election commissioners, and presently we have the Chief Election Commissioner and 2 election commissioners. Now, these 2 election commissioners number can change according to the President from time to time, right? Now, let's talk about powers and functions of the Election Commission. Now, the Election Commission has a lot of powers, and these particular powers can be divided into 3 categories. That is the administrative powers, advisory powers and the quasi-judicial powers. Let's talk about first the administrative powers. Now, the administrative powers are regarding the voter registration. So, the Election Commission is responsible for maintaining an accurate and up-to-date electoral roll, which includes the names of all the eligible voters in India, and it also conducts regular drives to ensure that the eligible citizens are registered to vote and that the electoral roll is free from errors and duplicates. So, the voter registration happens via the means of the Election Commission. Election Commission ensures that every person is registered to vote. And the second thing is that it conducts the elections. It conducts the elections to the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha and state legislative assemblies. Apart from it, it also monitors the media. So, the EC monitors the media coverage of elections to ensure that it is fair, balanced and objective. It also talks about, or it also provides for the security arrangements, or the election commission has the power to deploy security forces to maintain law and order during the elections so that free and fair elections do happen. Apart from the administrative powers we have talked about, there are advisory powers as well. The Election Commission advises the presidents and the governors regarding what matters regarding the conduct of elections, including the allocation of seats in the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assembly. Now, the second thing is that it also talks about the or it has the power to advise the political parties. So, the Election Commission advises political parties on matters such as registration and recognition, preparation of the party manifestos and the submission of the election expenses. Now, the Election Commission also advises the candidates regarding the regulations governing the conduct of the elections, including filing nomination papers, campaigning and the reporting of the election expenses. Now, this being considered, the Election Commission also advises the media as well regarding the coverage of the elections, and it also talks about it also talks to the media regarding the code of conduct and prohibition of the exit polls during the elections. So, these are some of the advisory powers. Now, the Election Commission also has the quasi-judicial powers. That is, it has some of the judicial powers. It can disqualify the candidates if it has found that the election that particular candidate has engaged in corrupt practices during the election, and it can also cancel an election if it finds the evidence of widespread malpractice or rigging, and it also resolves the election disputes. It registers the complaints regarding any kind of illegal campaigning or distribution of money or gifts to the influence of voters, and it also imposes penalties on some of the candidates if it finds that a particular candidate has violated the election laws or the model code of conduct. Now these penalties can also include fines, disqualification, or even imprisonment in some of the cases. So these are the three kinds of power: administrative powers, advisory powers, and then we have the quasi judicial powers, and this constitutes chief election or the election commission office as the most important office in the in India, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. We have talked about this particular changes in the election commission, and we have also talked about the powers which pertain to the election commission, and we have also talked about what is election commission, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. Let's now head to the next important newspaper article. Now, this particular newspaper article talks about the Sri Lanka's economic crash and what are the problems that it is facing. Now, this kind of newspaper article is important for the GS paper 2, that is effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest. Let's first understand the context of it, and then we will talk about the complete problem with the Sri Lanka's economy, right? So, as the country is familiar, balance of payments problem escalated last year. Citizens experienced crippling shortages and painfully long power cuts. This was all due to the fact that there were BOP crisis, that is balance of payment problems. Now they took to the streets. Now the people took to the streets regarding the crippling shortages, painful long power cuts in a staggering mass protest, and ousted the Rajpakshas who they held responsible for their suffering. And the chant was that they seeked the IMF support, the support of International Monetary Fund, and it persisted through these dramatic developments. Now, in July 2022, a former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was elected the president, and this happened all through an urgent parliamentary vote. And one of the first tasks he set for himself was to negotiate an IMF deal to resurrect the country's battered economy. Right? So the IMF deal happened in such a way that it required assurances from the other parties. Now, the assurances or the written financing assurances were sought from China, Japan, and India by the Sri Lanka. China and Japan agreed to this particular written financing assurances, and now at this particular point of time, China's written financing assurances are pending, and this has led to IMF not giving loans to Sri Lanka. Now, an ongoing IMF program helps Sri Lanka become more creditworthy in the eye of the global lenders, and that is why they are so desperate to take money out of the International Monetary Fund. Now, this particular funding will lead to creditworthiness of Sri Lanka, and at the same time, Sri Lanka can ask for money or loans from the other multilateral agencies like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank. But the bankrupt nation that defaulted on the $51 billion external debt last year hopes that with an IMF program it can borrow again, and after falling into a cycle of indiscriminate borrowing, especially in the last 15 years, Sri Lanka finds itself in a position where its problem and its solution look really similar at this point of time, because it has fallen into the debt crisis. It wants more debt to sponsor or in order to free itself from the debt. So the debt crisis is going to deepen, but at the same time it is the only solution which the Sri Lanka has at this point of time, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. Let's now head to the next important newspaper article. Now, the next newspaper article is regarding the G20 meeting, which is happening in India right now. Now, there are some of the divisions between the West, Russia, and China, and we are going to talk about it. We are also going to talk about the G20. What are the strengths of the G20? We are also going to talk about the challenges regarding the G20 and what can be the way ahead in this particular situation. Now, this particular newspaper article becomes important for the GS paper 2, that is important international institutions, agencies, and fora, their structure and mandate. Let's first understand the context of it, and then we will talk about the major problems regarding this particular meeting of G20, right? So deep divisions between the United States-led Western countries and Russia-China combined appended India's attempt to forge a consensus at the G20 foreign ministers meeting on Thursday. Now, these kinds of divisions have led to there are no major statements or no joint statement, but the major statements which have been made by the United States led the West Alliance as well as the China and Russia combined are very different. So the meeting in Delhi, which brought together the world's 20 most developed economies, saw sharp words exchanged by the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and a number of foreign ministers, despite an appeal from the Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the start of meeting to rise above the differences. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that he urged to all of these countries to rise above the differences. We need to solve the world problems, but these countries, they stuck to their own agenda, and the result was what India did not expect. So G20 members failed to produce a joint statement owing to these differences. They couldn't solve their own differences. And this became a major hurdle in producing a joint statement, which is produced after every particular meeting of any important international institution, right? So this is it regarding the statements regarding the current. Let's talk about what exactly is this G20. G20 basically is an informal group of 19 countries plus European Union, right? European Union is the union of all of the countries in the Europe. Now it is the informal group of all of these 19 countries as well as the European Union, and it has representatives of the IMF as well as the World Bank. Now G20 becomes very important because it is an interesting mix of both advanced and emerging economies, and together the G20 represent more than 80% of the world GDP, 75% of international trade, and 60% of the world population, which makes it the most significant international institution, right? Or international group, right? So how exactly this particular group came into being, or G20 came into existence? It finds its roots in the 1997 to 1999 Asian financial crisis. Now the Asia was going through or Southeast Asia was going through the financial crisis, and a ministerial level forum which was set up, which emerged after the G7 invited both developed and developing countries. So the finance ministers and the central bank governors began meeting in 1999. And amid 2008 financial crisis, it was realized the G7 is not very capable of handling the financial crisis, and the world saw that a new consensus building is happening at the highest political level, and it was decided the G20 leaders would begin meeting once annually, right? So to help these summits, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors continue to meet on their own twice a year, and they meet at the same time as the International Monetary Fund as well as the World Bank. Now, how exactly this particular institution or this particular group works? Now, the G20 work is divided into two tracks. First one is the finance track, which comprises of all meetings with G20 finance ministers and the central bank governors. They meet twice a year. And then we have the Sherpa track. These are some of the diplomats working in order to find out all the issues, or they are going to solve the broader issues such as the political engagement, anti-corruption, development, energy, etc. And each G20 country is represented by its Sherpa. Sherpa is basically the highest official, the official appointed by the particular country, who plans to and guides, implements, etc. on the behalf of the leader of their respective countries. And whenever the leaders meet, they all talk about the track that has been set up by the Sherpas, right? So who are the members of the G20? G20 consists of basically 20 countries: Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Republic of Korea, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey, the United Kingdom, United States, as well as the European Union, right? Now these are the 20 members of the G20. Now Spain also acts as a permanent non-member invitee, which attends the leader summit. So this is the composition of the membership of the G20. Let's now talk about the structure and functioning of the G20. Now, G20 presidency rotates annually according to a system that ensures a regional balance over the period of time. So, for the selection of the presidency, the 19 countries are divided into the 5 groups, each having no more than the 4 countries, and the presidency rotates between each group. Now, this particular group that India leads is known as Group 2, and it also consists of Russia, South Africa, and Turkey, right? So India at this particular point of time is holding the presidency of the G20, which means that group second is holding the presidency at this particular point of time. Now the G20 does not have a permanent secretariat or headquarters. Instead, the G20 president is responsible for bringing together the G20 agenda in consultation with other members and in response to the developments in the global economy. So every year when a new country takes on presidency, it works hand in hand with the previous presidency. At this particular point of time, India has the presidency, so it works hand in hand with its president, that is the Indonesia, and it also works with the Brazil as well. So this is known as the Troika. It is known as the Troika, and the current Troika consists of Indonesia, India, and Brazil. Indonesia conducted the last G20 presidency. Now India has this particular 2023 presidency, and Brazil is going to have the 2024 G20 presidency. This is how the presidency shifts over time, right? So now what type of issues are addressed by the G20? G20 consists of the broad agendas of issues of global importance. Although issues pertaining to the global economy dominate the agenda, additional items have also been added to it, like the financial markets, tax and fiscal policy, trade, agriculture, anti-terrorism, employment, energy, fight against corruption. All of these issues are included in the G20. It consists of very broad agenda of issues. Now let's talk about India. What does India want from the G20? Now India wants that the world should check tax evasion to fight corruption. It should choke. It talks about the choking terror funds. It talks about cutting the cost of the remittances, because India gets a lot of remittances. It wants that the taxes on all the kinds of remittances should be lowered. Now the market access for the key drugs is also to be opened according to India. Reforms in the World Trade Organization to improve its functioning. It is also championed by India. India says that you should reform the World Trade Organization for better, and apart from it, it also talks about the full implementation of the Paris Agreement. So these are some of the priorities of the India in G20 summits. Apart from it, the G20 has many of the strengths, many of the achievements. It is very flexible, very inclusive. It takes a coordinated action, and it also facilitates an increase in the lending from the multilateral development banks, and that is why the G20 becomes very important, very significant. Now with strength come also weaknesses. So let's talk about now the challenges. Now the challenges are many. For example, there is some kind of polarity which is going on in the G20 right now. Apart from it, there are many issues regarding it, and let's not talk about how can we overcome these particular challenges, or what can be the way ahead regarding it. Now the effective global governance like the G20 is essential, as the rising powers seek opportunities to influence and contribute to the global order. Now the G20 must strengthen the partnership with the international organizations such as IMF, OECD, the WHO, World Bank, and WTO, and delegate them the task of monitoring progress. And India must use G20 to counter aggressive India must use G20 to counter aggressive trade barriers, sanctions, inter-country conflicts, and advocate for the global peace and cooperation. And all of these agendas are being done at this particular point of time, or they are being fulfilled at this particular point of time, because India has the presidency of the G20 right now. So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article, and this is it for the day. Thank you from my side. Do like and share the video and subscribe to this channel. Have a good day. Bye.